Okay, welcome to part 2 of this. So we've looked at our main function. You can see now we have a main function here that's controlling our program. It goes off and calls a function called print welcome, which at the moment prints welcome message, and we've already written that function here. We've got to write a score called run quiz to actually run our quiz, and remember when the run quiz function finishes it needs to return a value for us, and we're going to store that return value in a variable called score. And then we're going to call a function called print results, and we're going to pass it the argument called score. So obviously score here is a variable. You can see here the print welcome function that we've defined down here doesn't have a return. Does that mean it doesn't actually return? Well, obviously not, no. Where's the end of the function? Well, the colon here says that the function starts with the indented blocks, and the last indented part of code is here. So the function ends at this line. It doesn't have a return, so it doesn't strictly return a known value. It'll return a null pointer basically. But up here where we call the print welcome function from, we haven't done anything with that return value anyway. So you tend to find that if there's no return here, it's probably because you're not interested in it, and therefore you don't bother capturing it here from the call and storing it in any variable. So let's have a think about our run quiz. And we said we wanted to do a maths type quiz. So we define our function. We said it's going to be called a run quiz, and the function itself doesn't take any arguments because we don't have to pass anything to run quiz. We might decide we want to pass to it how many questions we want it to ask. We might decide we want to pass whether it should be add, multiply, subtract or divide. There are things that we might want to pass to it. In our case, we're not going to do that. Our quiz is always going to be 10 questions, and we're always going to be doing multiplication. So the first thing we want within our run quiz is we need some way to keep track of the score, what the user gets. So I'm just going to call this variable math score, and initially obviously the person has got 0 marks. That's pretty straightforward. And then basically we want to ask 10 questions. So straight away, if we know we're asking 10 questions, we're going to be doing the same kind of thing. We know we want to do it 10 times, so we should know we need to use a for loop. And I'm going to go around the for loop. I'm going to create a variable, a loop variable, and I'm going to call it question or question. That's going to be the question number, probably is a better variable. So for question num in range, and I'm going to do 1, 11 because I know it only goes up to 10. So that's going to get my 10 questions. Notice now we're double indented here. We've got one level of indentation because we're part of the run quiz definition, and now within here we're again indented because this is a loop. These are the statements within this for loop. So what do I need to do to ask maths questions? Well, I need two numbers to multiply together. So I'm going to use num1 as one variable, and I'm going to call that from randint, remember, which is our random function, in the range 1 to 12. And I'm going to do the same line again, and I'm going to create a second function, sorry, a second variable, num2, which is also going to be a random integer. And then I need to actually, after now having got my two numbers, ask the question. So I'm going to say print what is, I don't need spaces actually, it's going to put them in for me, num1, comma, then I need the actual multiplication sign, I'm going to use an X for that, and I need the variable num2. So I'm going to say what is num1 times num2. I suppose I could put an equal sign because that's what I'm effectively asking. I'm asking what it's equal. Okay, so that hopefully there will print our math question with our two random numbers. Obviously now I want the user to, we've asked the user a question. We expect them to type the answer in now. So obviously I need to use an input function. And whatever they, so that's my input function, just type input. I don't need to ask a question within the input because I've already asked it here. And whatever input returns is what the user types in. So I'm going to assign that to a variable called user answer. So user answer is assigned. So user answer is assigned the return value from the input function, which is obviously whatever they typed in. Now remember, we should know this returns a string, so user answer will be a string at this point. So when we know how to do it, we should do some data validation in here. We don't know how to do it yet, so we're going to ignore it. So user int equals int user int. There you go. Let me say it again. Equals. It's not equals. It's assigned. So what does this do? It takes user int, which is a string value of what they typed in, converts it into an integer, and reassigns it to a variable called user int, which is now actually a newly created variable to store integers with the label user int. So we've got what the user typed in as their answer. We obviously need to know what the correct answer is. So correct answer is assign the value, obviously num1 multiplied by num2. So at this point here, we've got what the user, as I've called it user int there, there's a bit of a typo going on, user answer. I want to assign it to user answer. That's typical of things that you do. You're kind of thinking ahead and you make mistakes like that, and obviously it would have failed at some point when it found it was an unknown variable. So I've got user answer being converted from a string into an int here. So at this point here now in my code, I've got the correct answer, which I know I've calculated num1 times num2, and I've got the answer that the user typed in. At this point now, I need to compare the two answers, the correct one and what the user typed in, and depending upon what they did, do different things. So we need to understand how that works, and this is where we introduce the concept of an if statement, and we also introduce the concept of Boolean variables. So let's just have a look at that and see how that works. So we've done various types already. We've come across ints, we've come across strings, and we've come across floats as types of variables. We're now introducing a new type of variable called a bool, or boolean, a bool for short. And basically a boolean is true or it's false. So it can only have one or two states. And basically true or false, our Boolean variables, come to light from doing mathematical comparisons. And the mathematical comparisons we do are an equality one. Notice that's a double equals, so that's equals. We've also got a greater than or a greater than an equal sign. So that's a greater than or a greater than equals, or a less than or a less than and equals. And then we've actually got another one, although we can construct it from other ones, different ones as well. We've got an exclamation mark equals, which is a not equals. So by putting different operators, or they call them operands, either side of these signs, we can test whether two things are equal, whether one's greater than another, whether one's less than another or less than another or equal, or whether one's not equal to another. And if you think about it, each of these conditions, these tests, will either be true or false. So the result of doing one of these mathematical operations, these comparators, returns a true or a false, which is just another type of variable that we can use. We could assign it to a variable, which then become a Boolean variable, or more importantly, what we can do is we can use it in an if statement. The way the if statement works is our code comes down and basically we ask the question if, and then we do some form of test in here. And this is our Boolean test. We're testing things for being equal or greater than or less than. So the test that goes on in here will either return a true or return a false. If it returns a true with a simple if statement, we go down and we do another block of code, whatever's in that block there, and our program continues. If we just do a simple if statement, that's all that happens. If the test failed, if it was false, the false can come down and then just pick up the code and continue down here. But what we can also do is we can pick up and run some extra code if the answer is false. If it's false, we run a different block of code, and then the two codes join together and then continue down. And the syntax for this, which is the one we're using, is to say if the test, go the true route, else, so else is our alternative route. If it's false, go and do some different code. And this is the construct that we're going to be using in our next idea of how we look at this. So back to our code now. So I'm going to say if the correct answer is the same as or is equal to the user's answer, and notice the syntax again, we've got a test and we've got that colon again, which means we're going to get an indentation. There it is. So obviously this is what happens if they got the answer 2. We need to let them know that they got it true, so we'll print correct. And it would help if I could spell correct. And obviously because they got it correct, we need to look at their score, their variable called math score, and increase it by 1. So we need to take the variable math score, we need to add 1 to it, and we need to assign that value, so that's increased it by 1, back to the variable called math score. So when you think about the way that this operates, we say math score is assigned math score plus 1. What we really should be saying is we take math score, we add 1 to it, and then we store the result back in the variable math score. So we almost read it right to left. And that's the way it works. The operations on the right are done first, then the assignment statement, and the result is put into the variable on the left. So that's what happens if it's correct. If it was wrong, we actually want to do something specific, so we use an else command. The else command is what's picked up if it's false. Else, obviously, we need to say print. We need to tell them it was wrong. Sorry. Tough. Wrong. And I suppose we ought to tell them the right answer. So we maybe need to say wrong exclamation mark. It was. And then we know the right answer because we've just calculated it above. Correct answer. Okay, so we've got that function there now. And that then is the end of our loop. So what's going to happen is we're going to come down here, we're going to ask, go into the loop. This is our loop, everything that's indented is part of our loop. Generate our 2 numbers, ask the question, get the user input, convert it to an integer, work out what the right answer was. If it is the correct answer, tell them it's correct and add 1 to the score. If it was the wrong answer, say wrong it was, and finish. So that's the end of our for loop there. And when that finishes, I don't want to be indented anymore. So to return back to my main code, I need to be indented back in line with the first level of indentation, which is the end of the for loop. So it will come here when the loop has finished, once it's been run 10 times. And obviously what I want to do is return back to the main program, but I want to pass back the actual user score, math score. Okay, so we think we've written run quiz. We've called it up here. We haven't written the print results function yet, so I'm just going to comment that out so it doesn't get called. And after having run quiz, I just want to print the value of score. So I'm going to print the text score, comma, score. Okay, and it's going to get very boring doing 10 questions here. So just while I'm testing it, I'm just going to set that to 3, so it should just ask me 2 questions. Okay, let's run that, see if we made any mistakes. Okay, so rand, oh well, first start I've misspelt it, which I wasn't intending to do. Okay, you find things all the time. Oh, let's get it back. There we go. So it's rand int. Let's just rerun that. Okay, so this is what I was expecting to see. Rand int is not defined. So let's go back to our code. Rand int, well, it's that random function that generates numbers. Oh yes, of course. It's not part of the standard Python library. What I forgot to do up at the top here is say from random import rand int. Remember, it's an external function to the standard Python functions. So let's try and run that now. Okay, so it's done the function print welcome, because it said welcome to the maths quiz, how good do you think you are, get ready. It's chucked us straight into a question, what's 2 times 7? So we'll get this one right, we'll go for 14. It says correct. What's 3 times 12? It's 36, but I'm going to get it wrong, 34. Wrong, it was 36, and it's finished and told me the score is 1, which is correct. I got 1. Maybe I should have said 1 out of 10 here. It's a bit clearer. Okay, so it looks like our code is working here. I'll change that back to 11 because I do want to ask 10 questions. What's the last thing I want to do? Well, I'll take out the function which just was a quick test for me, and put our proper function in, which we've called print results. So I need to define that. Define print results. And I want to pass into it, remember we said we were going to pass into this, scroll back up to the top so you can see it. We're going to pass into it the score that the person got. So when I define the function here, I'm going to pass in something which is going to represent the user score. So I'm going to call it user score. Or maybe player score is better. I'll call it player score. Okay, so what do we want print results to do? Just again, it sort of did the colon there and it's indented. What do I want it to do? Well, depending upon what the user got, maybe I want to print different things. So I might now say if the player score is equal to 10, they obviously got full marks. So for that I want to print something suitable. What a superb score. Top marks. Okay, so if they get 10, it will print this statement, and then it would continue with the next block of code down in line with here. If they didn't get 10, then if I do nothing else, it will continue with the block of code down here, which I haven't written yet. But remember what we could do, we said we could put an else statement in here, else colon, and we've now got the option to give a message which will come into play if they didn't get 10. If But hang on, I might want to do different things for different scores. So what I could do here is use a new construction of this called elif, elif. And this now does another test. It says if the score was 10, do this, otherwise, and we can do another test. So we could say the player score was greater than or equal to 7. So if the score's in this range, we want to give a different message. So I might print good score, well done. And if it wasn't greater than or equal to 7, so I can do another elif. Else if, and what do I want to put in here? Maybe I'll say player, oh, where's the space? Player score greater than or equal to 4. And here I'm going to say print not that good, try harder. Now some of you at this point might be saying, hang on a minute, I don't understand what's going on with your tests here, because if the score was equal to 10 we printed a superb score, but then we tested if it was greater than or equal to 7. Well, what happens if it was equal to 10? That's greater than or equal to 7. So you might be tempted to do this and say if the player score is greater than or equal to 7 and player score is less than 10, because now you've picked out that particular range. So your first statement is saying if it's equal to 10, do this. If it's between 7 and less than 10, so that's 7, 8 and 9, do this. And it's fine, you can do that, it will work, but you've created yourself more work than you need. Think about it. If the player score was equal to 10, it would do this print line and then it would get out of the if statement. So it can only be down here if the result was not 10. So you don't actually need this extra command at the end, because you couldn't get down here if it was already 10 anyway. And similarly, down here when we're saying it's greater than 4, well, think about it. If it was 10, it would have exited at this point, because it would have printed that. If it was 9, 8 or 7, it would have done this statement and printed great score, well done, and it would have got out. So by here testing greater than or equal to 4, what you're actually saying, if it's 6, 5 or 4, because you can only get down to here if it's 6, 5 or 4. Not so good, try harder. And what we'll do now is we'll just put an else, so a catch-all, which it'll only get down to if it's going to be 3, 2, 1 or 0, and we'll put print poor score, exclamation mark, back to school for you. Okay, so that's an example of using if with elif and then an else catch-all at the end. And this is the way we do it in Python. If you're familiar with other languages, you might have come across case statements. It's a different way of doing the same thing. It allows us to test a single variable against multiple different ranges effectively, and do different things depending which range we're in. So it's quite a standard thing to do that. So let's see if our function runs. I'm just making sure I've done it correctly. Print results there, and I've got print results there. Okay, so run our quiz. I have left it at 10 at the moment. Again, it's going to be a bit boring watching that. So I'm just going to reduce it to 4, so it'll ask me 3 questions. So, okay. Okay, so it's done my welcome, which is the first bit. 10 times 9, 90. Oh, okay, so I didn't click in the window at the right time then. So let me just rerun that. There we go, got my finger in the right place now. 10 times 8 is 80. 1 times 8 is 8. 4 6s are 24. Poor score, back to school for you. Well, of course, I only got 3. Oh, by the way, it's not actually printed the score here, has it? So that's something maybe we've missed out. Well, this is an example, you see. I've actually coded this program to work, and everything is based on there being 10 questions. If I change the number of questions, then my quiz, the way, or my answers, what I've printed in my report, is not actually valid. It only really comes into play if I've got all 10 questions in there. So the obvious other thing I have missed out is actually telling them what the score was. So really, in my print results up here, I need to say print OK, finished, you got, and then I want to print the score that they got, which we've called player score, and then we want to say what it was out of 10. Okay, so to test it, I do need to actually unfortunately run it through 10 times. So if you're bored now, then fair enough, I understand, but let's just quickly run it back with 11 and see. Obviously, from a testing point of view now, we actually do need to test this with different scores, because I'm not sure that this is working. And one way to do it is to run the program and get different tests. Or the other way would actually be to write a little routine that just called print results and just passed in the various different numbers. And in fact, we'll do that as a little exercise on the end for those who want to see how something like that would work. So let's just run the program now. I don't know quite what I hit there, obviously the wrong thing. Okay, so get the window. So 3 times 2, 6, 1, 12 is 12, 4, 49. Gosh, I hope I don't get anything wrong here, it'd be rather embarrassing. 12 11s are 100 and, oh gosh, there you go, I forgot that one, 132, 42. 4 7s are 28, 11 11s 121, 6 5s are 30. Hooray! Got 10 out of 10. What superb score, top marks. So that proved that the program worked, and it certainly picked out the value of 10, which was quite good. From a testing point of view, we could rerun it and try and get different scores. But like I said, what we could do as well is, in our main function here, I could just comment these bits of code out for the moment, and I could just write a little test program in my main function, which just says for score in range 0, because I want to go down there to 11, which will obviously take me up to 10. I want to print, and I want to print score. So I actually want to see what the score value is. I suppose I should put the text score before it, so I can actually see what I'm printing. And then the value of score. And then what I want to do is I just want to call the function print results. And I'm just going to pass it the score variable in. So this has been written just purely for testing purposes. It's calling my print results function with all the possible values that my program can generate. So I just run that program. There we go. Let's see what happens. So score was 0, back to school. Score was 1, you got 1, back to school. 2, back to school. 3, back to school. 4, okay, finish, not that good, try harder. 5, not that good, try harder. 6, not that good. 7, great score. 8, great score. 9, great score. 10, superb, top marks. And that would be a very good way to actually test our code and test that function separately to show that it actually does what we expect it to do. So you've now got confidence in the print results function, and we don't need to do any more testing on that. The other one here we would have to test we could, rather than generate random numbers, actually generate sequence of numbers, again, to test that. But it's pretty straightforward. It should work. So we can get rid of our test bit of code now, and we can put our main bit of code back in. So the only one little bit to point out here that might have surprised a couple of you, or you might not have seen before, was the use of our variables and the naming of variables. In main here, we've called our score. The variable is called score. It's what's called locally scoped, so I can only use this variable score within the main function. If I try down here in print welcome or run quiz to use the variable score, we can't. It's only local to main. And when I pass it, because I want a function to have access to it, or a function generates it and passes it back to me, I then redefine the variable within that function, and it may have the same name or it may have a different name. It doesn't matter, and there are cases where we might want it to be the same name, we might want it to be different. I've made it different here just to illustrate the point. So when we call the function run quiz, that generates a variable called math score, and at the end it returns the variable math score. Now it doesn't return the name of the variable, it just returns the contents of it. So if you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever score you got, your score is returned at this point. So just an integer value is returned, and when it's returned from the function, it's passed into a variable with the name score. In this case, they've got different names. It doesn't matter. We're in main here. It's got the value. Score has got the value. We pass the value into the print results function as an argument. So when we call print results, we're passing in the contents of the variable score. What happens in the print results function? Well, the contents that are passed in are put into a variable called player score. Again, it could have the same name. In this case, it hasn't. It doesn't matter. It's put into player score, and then we use that within our print results function. The reason I've given them different names is to try and make it clear that what goes on in the function, unless we return it, is separate from what goes on in main. They're what are called the scope of the variables. So down here, if I try to use a variable called score, it would just say variable unknown, and by all means have a go at playing with that. Okay, so there's our pretty simple quiz. The main things we've done is introduce the idea of the main function, calling separate other functions. We've introduced a simple function that we pass no parameters in and it returns nothing, just to print welcome. We've generated a run quiz function that does all our kind of clever stuff, calculates the score and returns the value for us, which we've assigned into a variable score. And then we've used created another function called print results, and we're passing the score in as an argument. So you've kind of seen the three ways we use functions: no arguments, a function here run quiz where it returns an argument, and a function here in which we pass in an argument. And obviously you can do combinations of those, and in fact you can pass in multiple arguments and functions can return multiple values, but we'll see more of that later. Okay, I hope that made sense and that you enjoyed watching this and learned something from it. Thanks, bye.